This is the Saucony Endorphin Speed 5, and it's really not all that different from the Endorphin Speed 4. So is this just an upper update that we can ignore, or is this a matter of little tweaks that make a big difference? It's time to lace up the Endorphin Speed 5 and take it for a run. Yo, what's going on? My name is Kofuzi and I'm an elite runner who reviews running shoes here on YouTube. And today I want to talk to you guys all about the Saucony Endorphin Speed 5. But before I give you my thoughts on this shoe, I do want to go over some disclosures. This is a pair of shoes that I bought myself. No one sent it to me. Nobody's paying me to make this video or to include their brand in this video. And no one's going to get a chance to preview any of my footage or my thoughts before you guys get a chance to see this video on YouTube. So with that disclosure out of the way, let's talk about the Saucony Endorphin Speed 5. And let's start with the specs. This is a 36mm stack height shoe with an 8mm drop, giving us 28mm of stack height in the forefoot. And the setup this year is very similar to the setup we saw last year. They're using Power Run PB, which is a beaded PBA foam. So there's a race caliber foam in this shoe. And there is, again, a nylon plate, which you could see through the little window at the bottom of the shoe. Now, the only real difference that I could see kind of like on first glance in this year versus last year is that Saucony tells us there is an updated nylon plate. Now this is a nylon plate versus say a carbon fiber plate that you might see in a racing shoe. And a lot of times nylon plates are intended to stabilize the foam so it's not so wobbly when your foot hits the ground. On the outsole, we've got a little bit more rubber than we had last year. I think the design last year was gorgeous, and I think that they've kind of outdone themselves again in terms of making something as boring as a rubber outsole really quite pretty. I think this is a very elegant design here, and they've actually managed to add a little bit more rubber coverage. The main area being on this right lateral heel, which for me is a high wear area. And last year it had like a little bit of an outline of a rubber pattern in the lateral heel, and this year it's filled in, so you're gonna get a little bit more durability and you're running a little bit less on exposed foam and scuffing a little bit less of that exposed foam in that high wear area. But otherwise, they've kept this rubber coverage relatively thin, so that way it's not going to be interfering too much with what you're feeling underfoot in terms of the midsole foams, but it's still enough to protect the foam and also give you really great amount of traction. Moving to the upper, that's where I kind of like the biggest differences visually are for me when looking at these two shoes this year versus last year. And this year they've gone to what feels a little bit more of like a race inspired upper, whereas last year it was very much in kind of like the daily trainer category. And this type of shoe, this tempo shoe, kind of straddles that line between everyday and race day. And so this year it's kind of leaning a little bit more towards race day in terms of like the choice of materials and how airy and breathable it all is. They did use the same tongue, which I thought was really weird last year. I still think it's really weird this year. It's just a little bit too short, but at the same time, it's got this weird edge piece that sticks out really far on the lateral side, and I just think is kind of awkward. And then in the back, that's where we see like the biggest difference between last year and this year. Last year was just like a little bit tall of a heel cup that reached back a little bit over towards the Achilles. And this year it's more of an Achilles flare with a nice little kind of like pad back here to make it so that way you can use this Achilles flare to help get the shoe on. The lacing system, I think, is the same exact lacing system we saw last year. They're using the stretchy laces, which work fine enough for this shoe. And I went with my usual running shoe size, and that felt great. It felt like a really nice fitting upper. I think Saucony always does a really good job with how their uppers fit. And altogether, this shoe comes in at a pretty lightweight, 8.3 ounces or 237 grams. Now that we talked about what this shoe is like on paper, let's talk about what this shoe is like on the road. The Endorphin Speed 5 is a really fun tempo shoe. The Power Run PB provides a really nice amount of cushion and softness on landing, but it's also very pingy and it bounces right off the ground to give it a very energetic, speedy feel to it. So it's really great for easy everyday running, but it's also really fun for picking up the pace and even putting in a lot of hard efforts as well. The shoe is light and nimble, so you can turn over really quickly, but the upper is also really comfortable, so you could be in this shoe for a really long time. I took this shoe out for a long run with a lot of easy miles and some slightly faster than some easy miles in it too. And I found the shoe to be really fun for both when I was just cruising and also when I was picking up the pace a little bit. And I think that they've changed the shape of the shoe ever so slightly compared to last year to firm things up again just a little bit. And so it's just a little bit narrower of a shoe in the forefoot, through the middle of the shoe, underneath the arch, and in the heel as well. And I think especially in the heels where I feel the most changes. And everything's really very subtle, but I think ultimately those slight changes are making for a more lively and bouncy experience. And also it's creating a much more pronounced kind of light stability like feeling for me, like on this side of the shoe, just at the back of the arch, kind of like the top of the heel if this is the bottom of the foot and this is the top of the foot. And so when I'm at really long runs in this shoe, that's where I'm starting to feel kind of a lot of the shaping and changes that they've done to this shoe right under here. Fortunately, it's not something that rises to the level of being uncomfortable or painful for me, which a lot of kind of stability shoes end up being. For those of you who like to have a little bit of stability and you've had a lot of success with Saucony shoes, I think you're gonna like this change. I feel like this is gonna be a welcome update in terms of that portion of the shoe. I did take the shoe also for some recovery running as well. And again, for a lot of similar reasons, I didn't love it for recovery running, but the forefoot of the shoe is nicely soft, even though it is kind of technically a race caliber shoe. That PBA is really malleable. And so whether you're running really fast or really slow, it can really accommodate itself well. And they haven't tinkered around with too much of what's going on in the forefoot. So it's still a pretty comfortable recovery run shoe. Although again, I don't think that's really its forte. For me, I think where this shoe is strongest is when you're picking up the pace, when you want to go faster. Anything from a little bit faster than easy runs, all the way up to threshold repeats. I took this shoe out for like 5K at threshold just this morning, and it was absolutely lovely. It feels a lot like you're running in an Endorphin Pro when you're running in this shoe faster and you're getting up on the toes if you are a forefoot striker. And I just feel like there's plenty of midsole form for me to crash down on and push off of in that forefoot. And it's a really smooth, fun, and powerful experience. I'm not really missing the carbon too much, especially when comparing it to like an Endorphin Pro 4. And so I'm feeling like this shoe can feel like a race shoe when you want to go faster, and at easy running, which I think is its other like core competency, it's really comfortable to be able to run in for those easy runs, those everyday runs that you're going to be doing for most of the days of your week. So I'm really impressed with the Endorphin Speed 5 and just how much pace versatility it has and how great it is at such a wide range of paces. And the thing is, a lot of all this great stuff, and I'm really loving this Endorphin Speed 5, a lot of this great stuff that I'm saying about the Endorphin Speed 5, I said about the Endorphin Speed 4 last year too. So really what's the difference here? And I'd say that it's that slight increase in firmness, like narrowing everything, just shaving it just a little bit to make everything just a little bit more narrow, makes it a little bit more nimble and a little bit more pingy. It just feels like it bounces just a little bit better. And so I'd say the Endorphin Speed 4 probably does a little bit more of like recovery running, easy running, long, slow distance a little bit better. And the Endorphin Speed 5 does 5K threshold work, mile repeats, any kind of really fast work, and even race type of work. I think that is the Endorphin Speed 5 is going to have a slight edge in that area because of those little tweaks, which I do think make maybe not a huge difference, but a noticeable one for me.
Big reactions, servicing the intervention. This is fashion, gurning at the intersection.
Before we wrap up this video, I think it might be useful to take a moment to zoom out and see where the Endorphin Speed sits within the broader Saucony lineup. Now, I think to kind of understand Saucony and its offerings, we have to understand that it kind of has two segments, and a lot of other brands do this too. They have kind of more of like a everyday kind of normal athlete segment and then like a speed or serious athlete segment. And so like the everyday athlete segment is kind of like the shoes that they have been making for a long time. And for a long time, like this was like the main three shoes that Saucony made. They had the Ride, which was the daily trainer. This one, I actually really like. It's using just regular power run. It's a beaded foam that is actually really quite nice. I've kind of like fallen in and out of love with the Ride over the years. That's kind of gone through some iterations, but this latest one is actually really quite nice as a daily trainer. For max cushion, you have another shoe that's using Power Run PB, but the way that they've designed the shoe and the geometry they're using for the Power Run PB in this, even though it's also beaded PBA foam like we've been talking about all day today, it's a very different kind of experience, a very muted experience, but a lot of cushion, especially for my bigger, taller friends. This is going to be a really comfy max cushion shoe. And then for speedier stuff, there is the Kinvara. Now, back in the day, the Kinvara used to be the race shoe. Like before the carbon plate war started, like people were racing marathons in this low to the ground, low stack height, very light, very thin midsole shoe. And so after a certain point, I feel like people wanted something more out of their speedy shoes. Shoes like the Kinvara were kind of falling out of favor. And so Saucony made a capsule collection that basically took the concept of like light and fast and also fun for speedy kinds of running. They took that concept and exploded that into its own segment. And so let's move these shoes over to the side a little bit and we can talk about some of those shoes. We had the Endorphin Speed, which was part of that collection, and we had the Endorphin Pro, which was kind of the race shoe in that collection. And then we had the Endorphin Shift, which was supposed to be kind of the daily trainer. That one ended up not being like successful, and now they have the Endorphin Trainer, which has a similar foam on the bottom as the Kinvara and looks a lot like the Kinvara in terms of the design cues, the way that they're using this foam that doesn't really need an outsole to it. This does have a plate and a layer of Incrediron, which is one of Saucony's race caliber foams in here, but this is now kind of the daily trainer in this Saucony capsule. Now, there's also the Endorphin Elite, which is kind of an alternative in either or, depending on which type of race shoe you like. One way to think about how all these shoes kind of fit together is that the Kinvara kind of can be exploded into the Endorphin collection, and you can kind of start moving these shoes together in here. Not a lot of people are, they're still making the Kinvara, but not a lot of people are running in the Kinvara anymore. And in a lot of ways, this Endorphin Trainer and this Saucony Ride are very much overlapping, and there's going to be a lot of preference in terms of kind of like how stabilized and controlled do you want your shoe. The Endorphin Shift was very much, I'd say, a moderate stability shoe, if not a heavy stability shoe. And I think the Endorphin Trainer kind of isn't quite as stiff and rigid of a shoe, but it's kind of in that family. So if you want that kind of sensation for your daily trainer, you would go with that. But for me, I like the Ride, especially this latest version of the Ride. And so this is kind of how I would set up a Saucony lineup in terms of mixing some of the Endorphin capsule with some of the traditional shoes that Saucony makes, like the Ride and the Triumph. But I think we can even pare this down further, given just how versatile this Saucony Endorphin Speed is. And so as much as I like the Ride, I could probably remove it from the rotation as well. And if I had to go even further than having a 3-shoe rotation, I wanted to make it a 2-shoe rotation, I could probably trim it down. And realistically speaking, the Endorphin Speed 5 is so strong that it could probably be a 1-shoe rotation kind of shoe, although it's usually better to have more than one shoe. If you're doing a lot of running, if you're training for marathons, it's better to have more than one. But the Endorphin Speed 5 is so versatile, it can fill kind of the roles of all of the shoes that we had on the table. So it's pretty remarkable in just how capable this shoe is. Now let's wrap up this video by going over the buying guide, and we'll also discuss some alternatives. The Saucony Endorphin Speed 5 is a refinement to an already excellent shoe, and I love it for its versatility from everything from everyday to race day. Most people will probably enjoy this shoe as an everyday shoe that they can use sometimes for workouts, even some very tough workouts. But I think another group of people who are going to love this shoe are people who are looking for a different kind of a racing shoe. Maybe you don't like carbon, maybe it hasn't worked out for you in the past, or maybe you have a longer marathon race time and you're gonna be on feet a little bit longer. I feel like the extra comfort without too much compromise on performance, makes the Endorphin Speed 5 an excellent option for you as well. Now, this shoe retails now for $175, and that's $5 more than last year. So I'm hoping that that's just a taco price increase and that will go away when things go back to normal, if they ever go back to normal. In the meantime, if you're looking to save a little bit of money, and if you just happen to have the right size in terms of what inventory is left, you can go back to the Endorphin Speed 4, which is also an excellent shoe that is only slightly different than the Endorphin Speed 5. You could get this shoe for as low as $125, and I think that is a tremendous value. But let's also take a look at what else is out there on the market to see where the $175 price point stacks up for the Endorphin Speed 5. The first shoe that I thought of when running in the Endorphin Speed 5 comes from Diadora, and so this is a little bit of an underrated pick in my opinion, but I've been really loving their Frequenza too. Now, in terms of use case, I think Diadora wants to use this shoe exactly how Saucony wants you to use the Endorphin Speed 5. It's a shoe that you can use for every day, but it also is light and nimble enough that you can use for workouts and maybe even a race day, depending on your needs. This shoe is using a very different kind of foam. They're using a supercritical EVA here, but it's very light, very airy, but it has responsiveness to it as well when you need it. It doesn't have a nylon plate in it, so it's a very neutral shoe. So if the stability elements or light stability elements of the Endorphin Speed 5 are going to be a problem for you, I'd highly recommend looking at the Frequenza 2. Now, I will say that in terms of high-end performance, in terms of like going really fast, I do think that the Endorphin Speed 5 has a little bit of an edge because of that beaded PIBA foam that they're using versus a supercritical EVA. But if you want something that's a little bit softer, maybe you're going to use this a little bit more for everyday in terms of the everyday versus speed work mixture, then I think that the Frequenza 2 can be a very interesting and fun option. That shoe is a little bit more expensive though. You're paying a bit of a premium to get that Diadora logo on the side because that shoe comes in at $180. And then the other shoe that I want to talk about today is another shoe that I think is probably going to go under the radar for a lot of people, and that's from Brooks. This is the Hyperion 3. Now, the Hyperion 3, compared to my prior experiences in the Hyperion, is wildly different. It's so much softer, but it still also has really good responsiveness to it as well, which is a lot of the same way that I would explain the Endorphin Speed 5. And I think these two shoes can be used very similarly. Can be used for easy days where it's nice and comfy, and the DNA Flash 2, which feels very different than any other DNA Flash 2 that I've ever felt. The DNA Flash 2 in the Hyperion 3 feels nice and soft, very pleasant at easy paces, but it also firms up when you're trying to pick up the pace. It's a very nimble shoe that you could use to run hard workouts as well. As far as I know, there's no shank or nylon plate or anything in this, so you're just getting that DNA Flash foam, and it's an absolute delight to run in. I will be putting out a full review of this shoe very soon, but in the meantime, if you want to get your hands on it, you can get that shoe now, and it comes in at $140, which I think is an amazing price for what you're getting in the Hyperion 3. So those are my thoughts on the Endorphin Speed 5. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions about this shoe or any of the shoes that I talked about today, or better yet, stop by the live streams that I do Mondays and Thursdays over on the Kofuzi Run Club channel. I'd love to answer any questions you have over there in the chat. That's all I have for today, everybody. Thanks so much for making it all the way to the end of this video. Hopefully you guys are staying safe out there on your runs, and I will see you in the next one.
Yo, what's going on?